Okay, we're ready whenever you are. Hey, Missy, you've set it going.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good.
My name is Quinton and this is going to be my theory of knowledge presentation. For my real-life scenario, I've chosen to focus on the drone strikes carried out by the U.S. government, primarily the counterterrorism department. The countries that are usually hit by drone strikes are Afghanistan and Iraq, although more recently Syria has been fairly heavily hit as well. Proponents of drone strikes and people that support them will suggest that, or will cite the fact that they allow the United States to terminate individuals that would otherwise cause harm to the safety and security of the American people without actually endangering American troops by sending them there. People that disagree with drone strikes will generally say that due to their inaccuracy, oftentimes killing innocent civilians, that it's not justified and not morally acceptable. I think that from that real-life scenario, I can deduce this knowledge question: can acting without complete certainty be justified? I think this is a relevant knowledge question because in terms of certainty, there's certainty that the individual that is being targeted is actually guilty. There's certainty where they are, certainty if they are surrounded by people who are conspirators, and if they die as a result of collateral damage, would that be an issue? Or if they're innocent people, obviously that would be an issue. Also, it looks at justification. Even if these people are terrorists, are we justified morally, politically, or otherwise to fly planes basically into other countries and kill people without any kind of legal or moral permission otherwise? In order to better explore some of the different avenues of my principal knowledge question, I've devised 4 subset questions. What is the definition of justified? Is complete certainty an attainable goal? Does the nature of an action affect the degree of certainty required? And how do other environmental factors affect the definitions of both certain and justified? So if I begin with my first subset question, what is the definition of justified? The Merriam-Webster dictionary defines it as to provide good reason for the actions of someone. Unfortunately, that's not particularly useful because it uses reason, and obviously each individual person will develop their own sense of reason based on their personal experiences, the culture they've grown up in, and various other factors. So unfortunately, that's not a very good definition. But if I explore different kinds of justification, in terms of moral justification, there are 3 main political ways, 3 main philosophical ways that can happen. There's intentionalism, and intentionalism is a strain of philosophical thought whereby the value of an action is based on what the intention of the action was. So if I apply it to my real-life situation, what that means is if the intention is to kill a terrorist with the drone strike, regardless of what happens, as long as the intention is good, then the method can be valued. So that's one strand. The next type is consequentialism. That focuses on the consequence of the action and basically the result of what happens if we how that is basically related to the value. So what that means in relation to my real life scenario is if lots of civilians are being killed and no terrorists are being killed, obviously the consequences indicate that it would be a poor choice. But a consequentialist view of drone strikes, if lots of terrorists were being killed and no civilians were being killed, would suggest that it's a good idea, and that has nothing to do with the intention, only with the result. Finally, there's deontologicalism, which is a strand of philosophical thought whereby the value of an action is judged based on its adherence to the rules. Whether they be political, moral, whatever the context is, if they're adhering to the rules, then it's valued. Very, very rarely are drone strikes going to be viewed as a good idea with a deontological mindset, because oftentimes international law is broken, flying planes, unmanned aircraft over countries to kill people without the political permission of those countries, and that's not even beginning to touch on some of the moral aspects of it. One of the conclusions is it's an ambiguous definition. Unfortunately, there's no singular person or body that can decide internationally what a definition of justified is. There's holy books where, holy books will generally fuse all 3 of these different types of moral justification types to create some of their own ways. But again, people often have a hard time implementing ideas from holy books into my next point, which is political justification. Oftentimes, people will face very minor repercussions if they do something that's maybe morally unjust, but if it's politically unjust, they're going to be liable in very, very many different ways. Political justification can be occasionally seen as immoral because people writing the laws don't necessarily have a better understanding of justified than the people who are forced to follow the laws. So in terms of a more simple answer of what is the definition of justified, I would say that it varies on a case-to-case ratio, case-to-case basis. But I think that all three of these different types of moral value systems should be taken into account depending on what the situation is. And I'll be able to explain more what I mean by that as the presentation progresses. So if I move on to my second subset question I have, is complete certainty an attainable goal? Merriam-Webster, again, defines certainty as a fact about which there is no doubt. So in terms of how people may deduce certainty, there's sense perception. If I see a person say they're going to commit an act of terror, I may be certain that that person is a terrorist. And that's personal knowledge. Then there's shared knowledge. If I were to tell another person that I thought that that person was a terrorist and that person trusted me, then they may also be certain. So that is a different way of knowing. Irrespective of my real-life scenario for just a moment, math and statistics can be used in very many different ways to deduce certainty. There are some drawbacks to this. A lack of data would be the first one. If you have an amount of data that is not fully representative of the entire population of whatever you're looking at, that's obviously going to create, you're going to have deductions, I should say, that don't really coincide with reality. There's not recognizing existing data or trends. Something like that would be, sometimes cunning mathematicians will be able to create graphs that manipulate data in such a way they actually show correlations that don't exist if it was viewed in a more unbiased setting. And basically, as long as we acknowledge these things and we look at math and statistics when we make these deductions of certainty, that math can absolutely be used as a viable way of deducing certainty. I just want to talk about personal perception versus a more omnipotent reality, and what I mean by that is I may see someone do something and I may be personally completely certain that that person is a terrorist, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are in an omnipotent reality. Obviously, we cannot go to an omnipotent reality and access this kind of completely unbiased world. So, unfortunately, consensus will generally have to judge what we decide. And also with certainty, specifically with regard to my real-life scenario, is the ever-changing situations. Once certain is not always certain. People may become radicalized and then become unradicalized and decide they don't want to be a terrorist. We need to be certain on where they are. Obviously, where they are changes. Who they surround themselves with changes. And so to answer this question more concisely, I would say, really, certainly with regards to my real-life scenario, no, it's not possible just because there's limited information available to begin with, and it's constantly changing. Briefly now, does the nature of an action affect the degree of certainty required? So with a more remedial situation like buying presents, that involves two parties, the buyer and the receiver, and the buyer may use an intentionalist way of buying the present. Like the intention is to buy the receiver something good, so that justifies it. Same thing with answering test questions, except it's with one person. The intention is to get the right answer, so that justifies putting something down. With high intensity situations like drone strikes, all of a sudden intentionalism becomes less appealing. It becomes more consequentialist because the magnitude of whatever you're about to do is higher. You then begin to basically change the way that you reason. So I just wanted to point out that there's an inconsistency in reasoning even with the same knowledge question when applied to different scenarios. For my final subset question, I want to talk about how environmental factors affect some of the different things that I mentioned earlier. I have instances on an accelerated time frame. If a terrorist says he's going to act in the next 24 hours, people are going to need less information to fully justify that person's killing because there's a time constraint and that will obviously hurry them. There's emotional investment. If we just take a break from my real-life scenario for a moment and we go to 2011 where a man came home and his daughter was being raped, the man who came home got a gun and shot the rapist, and the shooter, the guy that came home, did not go to jail. It wasn't a premeditated event, and the man is obviously heavily emotionally involved, seeing as it was his daughter, and so the jury didn't find him guilty morally of any wrongdoing. And that just also a side point is, do the history of the people involved affect how we justify things? So conclusion to my principal knowledge question, can acting without complete certainty be justified? I think unfortunately it has to be, certainly with regards to the drone strikes. Obviously it's preferable to be certain in every action that you take, but it would be impossible to apply to daily life if you having complete certainty for everything. I think Edmund Burke, a famous English philosopher, sums up my thoughts on the idea, and that's all that is necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. And I think that if we are not completely certain about something, so we sit stagnant and do nothing, evil will triumph. I think that coincides very well with my views on the drone strikes as well. So that concludes my presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.